September 19th, and the time is 10:03. First item on the agenda is an update on the police pension fund. And Mr. Ambrose?
Yes.
And Mr. Frost.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Is this showing up there or not yet?
Yes.
It is. Okay. Thank you. I figured you had it. Well, good morning, everyone. Good to be here with you today. My name is Jeff Ambrose, and I am the actuary for the West Palm Beach Police Pension Plan. I have about 30 years of experience, and I've been the consulting actuary for the West Palm Beach Police Pension Plan for about 15 years. Today, I'd like to provide you with an overview of the state of the West Palm Beach Police Pension Plan. I'll keep my presentation to 15-20 minutes, if that's okay. And please feel free to ask questions as I go through it. You don't have to wait till the end. Making it interactive is probably the best way to keep this as exciting as possible. So before going into the PowerPoint presentation, just want to provide some background. Some of you may remember I presented the same presentation about 14 months ago. And since that time, there's been significant changes in the pension plan. These changes were reflected in our October 1, 2021 valuation report. And after reflecting these changes, the required city contribution stayed the same, basically. So we had a lot of changes, 4 of them to be specific, and the contribution requirement for the city in our 2020 valuation report was virtually the same as the 2021 valuation report. It stayed at about $5.3 million. Of course, the investment return since October 2021 has been very challenging. And we'll discuss what sort of impact that is expected to have on the required city contribution. Just going back a little bit more in time, it wasn't too long ago that this pension plan had bigger issues. In 2014, the required city contribution, which again is now about $5.3 million, was about $10 million. And it was increasing each year. The funded ratio, how much of the liability was covered by the plan assets, was decreasing each year. And the level of benefits being provided was reduced as state money was going to fund the pension plan instead of going to what we call a share plan for the police officers. Since 2014, there's been very significant changes in the health of the retirement system. And today we're going to discuss 2 of those main changes, and that was the $50 million pension obligation bond, as well as the very strong returns we've had since that time. We'll also talk about how the pension obligation bond has been working for the city. You know, they issued a bond, put the proceeds in the pension plan, but the city has to pay back the bondholders. So we'll sort of see how that is going for the city. We'll talk about the current level of the required city contribution, the 4 changes that were reflected in our most recent valuation report, what we know about future required city contributions, and finally a comparison of the West Palm Beach Police Pension Plan to other plans. But before we discuss that, let's talk about the benefits, the 3 benefits for police officers. If we go to slide 3, which I'm on, you'll see that the main pension benefit for police officers is calculated by multiplying 3 numbers. It's calculated by their pay, their service, and the benefit multiplier. The benefit multiplier is now 3%. So the member gets 3% times service times pay when they retire. When can they retire? When can they start receiving their benefits? Well, normal retirement is the earliest of 3 different conditions: age 55 with 10 years of service, or age 50 with 20 years of service, or finally 25 years of service, regardless of how old they are. Finally, the members do help fund this pension plan. They contribute 11% of their pay each year to help fund the pension plan. Slide 4 reviews the drop program, which allows the officers to retire from the pension plan, but continue working for the city for a maximum of 5 years. During the period of drop participation, an officer's monthly pension benefit is accumulated and paid to the member when he or she terminates employment with the city. These payments to the drop earn interest. They earn either 4% interest each year or 8% interest each year, depending on a couple of factors, which I'll talk about in a short while. Slide 5 discusses the share plan. The share plan is funded by annual premium tax revenue. The amount of annual premium tax revenue is allocated equally amongst the active members each year. The most recent state contribution was $1.8 million in this August of 2022, which means each officer received about $6,300. Slides 6 through 8 go through a number of numeric examples of the calculations of the regular benefits, drop balances, and share plan balances. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to review those. But if you ever look through those and you ever want to talk to me about it, you could give me a call and we could review those.
Will a copy of this deck be provided to us?
Yeah.
Could you get it to us, please?
Yes.
Thank you, Faye. So let's turn to slide 9 to discuss the history of the
Jeff,
pension.
I would just like to point out that the number on here, the drop balance, the basic drop balance, after 5 years, generally would be about $300,000, so that the officer retiring not only would have their pension, but would be getting $300,000 along with that.
To what
And
slide are you referring, Jack?
This is on slide 7.
Because we can't see it.
Yeah.
There it is. On slide 7 towards the bottom, you'll see, again, 3 main benefits for the member. In this example, this is just a hypothetical example. This officer would receive $4,500 per month starting at age 55. They'll get that drop balance of $310,000, and then the share plan balance of $190,000. But remember, they also helped fund these benefits by contributing 11% of their pay. And that's on the next slide as well. Okay, so let's discuss the pension obligation bond and how that's worked out for the city. Just for the background, in July 2016, the proceeds of a $50 million pension obligation bond were deposited into the pension plan. And as a result of this deposit, the funded ratio, how much of the liability is covered by assets, increased from 82% up to 97%. The amortization payments on the unfunded accrued liability, which are part of the required city contribution, decreased by $6.5 million. So again, that was the main cause for the decrease in the required city contribution back then. On slide 10, here we compare how this pension obligation bond has been going for the city. And you'll see that the investment return on the $50 million bond that was deposited into the pension plan, it's earned about $25.6 million. So that's the $50 million was put into the pension plan July of 16, and it's earned $25.6 million. That's good, but the city also has to pay the bondholders. So what did they pay the bondholders? $10.8 million. So net of everything so far to date, or at least as of October 1, 2021, or 2022, excuse me, I should say, the interest earned in the pension plan exceeds the interest paid to the bondholders by a little bit less than $15 million. So the number was a lot higher last year, but due to the investment performance for the year ending 2022, they're still doing very good on it, but it's $14.8 million.
What's the term of the bond?
That's outside the pension plan. I'm not sure myself.
30-year?
We'll get that. Typically it is, but I don't know that offhand, but we'll find out and get you that
Thank you.
answer.
Very good. If we turn to slide 11, we see the investment returns the plan has had since 2012. These returns have been extremely strong and have averaged 11.4% during the 10-year period. Of course, there's a number that's not there right now that's for the year ending 9/30/2022. Even after including this number, which is negative, the average return for the 11-year period is still about 7%, so still very positive. If we turn to slide 13, here we see the results of our October 1, 2021 valuation report, which determined the required city contribution for the fiscal year we're currently
Is there
in.
any way to enlarge that? We can't read that.
Let's see.
It's pretty much.
Or give us a
Big
copy
Dan.
of the deck or something. I mean,
Oh, I think it's just this. Right here.
Okay, I'm trying to get your.
Here we go. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let me make it bigger. Sorry about that.
well, we need one for everybody. I mean,
I'm just
Okay,
taking
yeah,
pictures of it,
yeah,
it's fine.
but
You can give it to the mayor,
yeah.
Jack.
Okay.
We have younger.
So here you'll see there are two components of.
old eyes. I got old eyes. Okay, that's fine. I will accept that.
Here you'll see there are two components of the required city contribution. First, there's the employer normal cost, and this represents the value of the annual accruals each year for the police officers. This is about $4.8 million, or 19.45% of covered payroll. It also includes about $290,000 in administrative expenses, which represents about 6 basis points of the assets, and this is lower than most of my other plans. The second component of the required city contribution is the amortization payments on the unfunded accrued liability. And based on Florida statute, when there are changes, whether it's gains or losses or assumption changes or plan changes, these don't impact the required contribution fully in the year it happens. It's spread over a period of time not to exceed 30 years. So the amortization payments, as you can see here, in that leftmost column for 2023 are $0.74 million or $740,000, or about 3% of covered payroll. So from this slide, we see that the required city contribution for fiscal year ending 23 is $5.53 million if the payments are made throughout the year, and $5.35 million if they're made at the beginning of the year. This is, again, the same required contribution that was in our prior valuation report, and you can see that in the leftmost column. Okay, let's go to slide 16. Let me just make this a little smaller. Okay, so slide 16. This shows the other funding metrics, and I want to discuss this before we discuss the changes, the 4 big changes that were reflected in our 2021 valuation report. The funded ratio, again, the percentage of the liability that's covered by the assets, as of October 1, 2021, the funded ratio was over 98%, and that's extremely strong. And when you compare it to other plans, our firm services about 130 plans in Florida, and the average funded ratio for those plans as of October 1, 2021 was in the upper 80% range. So this being in the upper 90% range is extremely positive. Let's see. Let's go to the changes reflected in the October 1, 2021 valuation report. And again, there were 4 major changes that I'd like to discuss with you. The first one was lowering the investment return assumption from 7.25% to 7%. So this change was adopted by the board in order to get the assumption more in line with the capital market forecasts projections. Due to this change, there is a higher probability of meeting the assumption each year. Additionally, if the assumption is met over a long period of time, the gains and losses will offset each other, and the required city contribution will migrate towards the normal cost, which again is 19.45% of payroll. Going to page 18. This is the second change that was made in the 2021 report, and that was to fresh start the assets. So what does that mean? As of October 1, 2021, there were $40.6 million of deferred investment gains. These gains were scheduled to be recognized over the next 3 years. But instead of following this schedule, the board immediately recognized these gains as of October 1, 2021. The next item reflected in our 2021 valuation report was a $19.5 million supplemental pension distribution that was paid to retirees. Under this provision in the Special Act, the payment may only be made if there are cumulative actual gains since the provision was put into the Special Act in 1992. In our 2021 report, the plan had moved into a positive cumulative gain position, and as a result, the $19.5 million supplemental pension distribution payment was made. This was the first payment from this provision that was made since 2007. Due to the significant investment losses in 2022, there will likely not be a supplemental pension distribution for 2022. The last change that was...
Jeff, just to add some numbers, what that distribution, what it is if we are 100% funded, then any returns we get that are above 7, between 7 and 9%, become a supplemental distribution to the retirees. And when we declared this, the average retiree distribution was $70,000, which is quite a significant piece of income for particularly the older retirees who may be only getting $30,000 or $40,000 a year. So we were delighted to be able to carry through that benefit. In addition, even though it was $19 million and the market was down, most of the retirees rolled that into their plan so they didn't get hit with the tax liability. So what happened was there was only $8 million that we needed to actually send out. At that point, we received the city's contribution, thank you very much, which then meant that coming out of pocket, we were only about $3 to $4 million that we actually had to then take, which we took basically from our fixed income. Thank you.
And thanks for that, Jack. The last change that was made is very important to the city because it established or created a $15.5 million contribution stabilization reserve. This was established on October 1, 2021. So this reserve will be used to offset future required city contributions in an attempt to dampen contribution volatility. For example, when we come in and present our 2022 valuation report, it may be that the required city contribution increases by $2 million. We don't know what the numbers are yet, but if that was the case, it may be that the contribution stabilization reserve, we could take $1 million out of that, and then the city contribution would only increase by $1 million instead of $2 million. Again, after reflecting all of these changes, the 4 changes, the contribution from our 2020 report was virtually identical to our 2021 report. So now let's turn to the page 21 to discuss what impact the investment return for fiscal year ending 22 is expected to have on the figures we've discussed so far. So the investment return for fiscal year ending 22, which was September 30th, 2022, was minus 10.44%. Although this is not a strong performance on an absolute basis, it compares extremely favorable on a relative basis. So we have, again, 130 pension plans that we service. We don't have all the returns in for that period of time, but of the ones I've seen, and there's probably like 15 or 20, this may be number 1 or number 2. So although it's not great to lose 10.4% on a relative basis when other plans are losing 13, 15, 20% I've seen, it actually is strong. So that means that the board, with the help of the investment consultants, have outperformed the performance of most other pension plans in Florida. Nonetheless, the minus 10.4% return will create an actuarial loss in our upcoming 2022 valuation report. The good news about this investment loss is, again, it's less than other plans. It will be smoothed over a 4-year period, so it's not that the city won't feel the brunt of that all in the year it happens, and it will also be amortized over a 20-year period. And finally, to close, hopefully I've kept it somewhat close to 20 minutes.
Also, just to point out again, last year, the prior year, our return was a little over 23%, which was a remarkable year. So when it gets smoothed out, it won't quite have as big an impact.
Yeah, and keep in mind, when a plan has a poor investment return year, for individuals, we hate that. We have 401ks or whatever our investments are, and we lose 10%. That's really bad. For a pension plan, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it does create opportunities because pension plans are not just investing for the short term. They're here in perpetuity. And actually, when it goes down, what happens? The required city contribution goes up, it's put into the pension plan, and over time, the earnings on that should be more. Essentially, pension plans are forced to buy low. And it happens time and time again. That's why pension plans exist in perpetuity, and they're very successful. But for pension plans, as much as we hate losing money on a yearly basis, it creates opportunities for a pension plan. But slide 22, the last slide I just want to briefly discuss, shows a comparison of the employer normal cost for several of the public safety plans in Florida. Remember, the employer normal cost represents the value of the annual accruals each year in the pension plan. This slide should be used to give you an idea of how the benefit level for the West Palm Beach police officers compares with other Florida public safety pension plans. It's not meant to be an exact measure of the benefit levels because each plan uses different assumptions. And I'm going to try to make this bigger as well. So don't take it as an exact measure, but you could get a sense for where the benefit levels are. And you can see from this slide, the West Palm Beach police officers' normal cost is 19.45%. We have a pretty wide range of normal costs, the average being about 25%. So that concludes the review of the PowerPoint presentation, but I'd be happy to try to field any questions or concerns that any of you may have.
Do you have, and maybe it's in here and I missed it, a chart showing the annual city's contributions since we imposed the pension bond?
Since 2014?
Yeah.
Or 2016, I should say. It's not in this, but it is in our annual evaluation report. So that there.
That's something you could send us, just showing
Yeah, well, I could get a
how
copy
that is
of
varied
that.
each year?
Yeah, definitely. It shows it in our evaluation report, the required city contribution, how much I paid each year, not just since 2016, but going back many years before that. So I could get that information to you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
Commissioners, any other questions, comments? Commissioner Ward?
Just on this last slide, just what is this, this figure? I am still not,
No problem. It's the employer normal cost. So what does that mean? And, it's just the value of the accruals from the members in this plan each year. So on average, so let's look at the first one, Boynton Beach Fire. Their normal cost rate is about 25%. So that means 25% of pay. So that means each year that the city has to put in 25% of pay for that officer to cover their accruals for that year. In West Palm Beach Police, it's a little bit lower, it's at 19.45%. So it's meant just to give you an idea, because each plan uses different assumptions, so you shouldn't say, well, then our plan is this compared to the other plan. It's just, to give you a general guideline. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
that helps. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions, commissioners?
A couple of comments, Mayor.
Sure?
I think, first of all, the size of the fund is $450 million. So when we're talking 1% or 2%, it's a big impact. And it has fortunately grown over the years. And I'm sure what you're really wondering is how have we been doing this fiscal year? And so far, we're up about 5% on the fiscal year. Our assumption, of course, is 7%. So we're on a good track so far despite a less than kind December. And what I would also like to do is we've been recognized. There is a Public Pension Coordinating Council. First off, I'd like to say I think you can be proud of the board that we have, because the other members, trustees that I serve with, really are a very fine group. We have one of them here, Captain Ahern, and also Captain Marchese, Troy Marchese, serves on the board, as does Sean Williams, who is a local CPA, and also Dana Fergakis, who is an attorney who does a lot of trust work. But the Public Pension Coordinating Council represents most of the association, most of the funds, and they represent more than 500 of the largest pension plans in the United States, serving most of the nation's 18+ million state and local government employees. And they established minimum standards for each retirement system to try and meet. And we have been recognized, and to receive the recognition award for administration, the system is certified that it meets requirements in 5 areas. They are a comprehensive benefit program, an actuarial evaluation done every 2 years. Ours is done annually, an audit, and an investment with investment policies and written fiduciary standards, and then communications with the members. And we also have a very extensive website that you might find interesting to go to. And then for funding, the fund needs to have either a funded ratio of 100% or a contribution rate equal to or greater than 100% of annual required contributions. And we're very pleased to have met that. We have a plaque that we'd like to present to the mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, one question I have, and
Sure.
Jack and I have had conversations, is how are we doing with the diversity of our investment managers? Do we have small businesses, do we have minorities, do we have women-owned companies that are part of the mix?
All of the above. We
Okay.
have from JP Chase, and actually, we're now, each of our managers comes to us at least once a year, and one of the items on the agenda is a diversity report. And JP Chase has very detailed, as this has become something that funds want to know about. And not only did they just have it divided according to gender and race, but also according to different levels of administration and who their analysts are, who the folks are who are doing, just in the back office. And as of November of last year, for example, they were 40% female and 63% minority overall. We have a small private equity company, Taurus, that has just begun, and it's only half a dozen employees, and they are, I think 2 of their employees are minorities. So we vary from large firms to small firms. We do have, and what's also very encouraging is that even some of the firms that are not that diverse have recognized that they need to take some more positive, proactive activities, and many are providing internships and recruiting in various areas.
Could you provide me and the commissioners with a summary of the diversity of the fund managers?
I think we should be able to. Our consultant is trying to get that together by the
Okay.
end of the year, and so we're running out of years, so we should have something available in the near future.
Please, thank you. Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you so much for the presentation and congratulations on the award. Thank you for the hard work on that. I'm curious, with the success of the pension and the growth of it and the, I guess the amount that we've made on the pension obligation bond over the interest, I'm curious if this is used as a tool for, I would guess, retention versus recruitment, because I don't know that many of our young firefighters are thinking about their pension when they start, but I don't know if you have any anecdotal evidence of that.
Yeah, I could say, that is one of the major features of a retirement plan, is attracting and retaining employees. And I would say public safety, from what I've seen, even when they're hired, it's a big decision point in them coming to one city versus another. So the retirement plan is definitely big. Obviously, as they get closer to retirement, it becomes that much more important. The drop is a great retention tool, because when someone goes into the drop, they're normal retirement eligible. They don't leave the city, but they stop accruing a pension benefit. It stops there, but then they could still work for the city for another 5 years. Their pension benefit gets deposited into an account and then ultimately paid to them as a lump sum, or they could roll it over. But yes, it's definitely an attraction and retention tool, and it helps, like that example of drop helps the city with employment, because they know when someone enters a drop, which is very common for public safety plans, that they will be leaving in 5 years. So it gives them a period of time to plan for when they're going to retire or terminate employment. Instead of just 2 weeks' notice, I'm gone, they have a period of time to plan for that.
Thank you, that's great to hear. And my apologies, I think I said firefighter instead of
No worries.
police.
Same applies to them, by the way.
All of our public safety, I want to make sure it's utilized. Thank you.
Sure.
And I have heard anecdotally from Captain Ahern and Captain Marchese that this has been very attractive for us. Once we have people who are vested after 10 years, then it's very difficult for them to look elsewhere. And as much as you've probably heard about the difficulty in retaining officers, this has been a real positive for us.
Can I just add one more thing, just as an example? There have been cities that have cut back their pension plan benefits, Town of Palm Beach being one of them, to a very low level. And essentially what happens is new members or existing members go to neighboring cities. So for the new members, essentially, members with 5 years of service are upset about the low level of benefits. They get their training from that city, and then they go to a neighboring city. And that's like the worst thing that you'd want. You don't want to be a training grounds for members, and then they go to neighboring cities. So the pension plan is an important tool, part of the package for the officers.
Well, I think also having such a high percentage of our pension or the city's obligation funded already is a tremendous feather in the cap of the city's fiscal health. You can hear horror stories about cities around the country that are well below where we are and on the brink of bankruptcy, and because they have those unpaid pension obligations.
You got it, yeah. Definitely.
We are tremendously healthy as a city from this particular aspect. and I'm sure our CFO and our city administrator appreciate that in terms of evidence of the city's fiscal health.
Definitely agree with that.
Did you want to say something, City Administrator?
Well, I just wanted to give you the answer to the question you asked about the maturity of the bond. According to finance, that 2016 $50 million bond was a 19-year term, and it matures in October of 2035.
So once that bond matures, then we will no longer have to pay interest to the bondholders, correct?
That would be correct.
Interesting. Any other questions, Commissioners? Well, thank you for this report, and notwithstanding the negative results from last year, all in all, I think it's an excellent report and speaks to the health of our pension fund. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone. Have a good holiday season.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is flooding water ponding prioritization. Josh McDermott and Kevin Balbrath.
Mayor, Commissioners, Armando Fon, Assistant City Administrator. I just want to tee this up real quick while they're getting ready. You know, there's really increasing demands on local government and increasing expectations on local government for services, particularly over the last few years. And as, like everybody else, we have challenges with staffing. I think one of the biggest challenges we're facing these days is framing those expectations. So staff has been working for a very long time, because one of the things that you all get calls on and we get calls on, and the mayor does as well, is when you have heavy rains, we get the flooding calls in particular neighborhoods. So staff has been at this for well over a year now and trying to establish prioritization and figuring out ways that we can communicate to residents what those priorities are when it comes to flooding, because everything can't be a priority, or else nothing is a priority. And so Josh and his team has put together a framework to help evaluate flooding throughout the city and come up with some metrics on how we deal with flooding and prioritize flooding as well. And so I want to thank the staff for putting a lot of time and effort. There's still a work in progress. This is just an informational presentation for you all to see where the road we're headed and get a little bit of feedback from you all. But Josh, go ahead and kick it away.
Thank you, Armando. Good morning, everyone. Josh McDermott, Public Works Director. I did want to acknowledge Matt Hajazi. He's our industrial engineer. He wears a lot of different hats, but he did put a lot of effort into this. As Armando stated, it took a few years to complete. It's been in place for almost a year now. There's some things we're tweaking, and there's some feedback that we would like from you all at the end. So if you have any questions at the end, please. So a little bit additional background. So Public Works, Utilities, and Engineering identified the need to have a process to help with the following. One, identification of a responsible department. So the first person who responds, we wanted to make sure that that was identified. Standardized response to flooding and standing water concerns. 3, prioritization process. And really important part of the step is a tracking method. And last, communication to residents and our stakeholders. So the first step, we developed a new interdepartmental process to clarify responsibilities, perform field verification, and take interim action. So again, the first person that goes out there to, once we get a flooding or a standing water complaint or concern, is our Public Utilities Stormwater Division. So we wanted to make sure to streamline the process. They're the first people that are called out. Once they get there, they perform a field verification, and there's a checklist that we'll bring up on the screen briefly. So they establish a priority level based on the field assessment. So this is the checklist that our field crews fill out when they first respond to the site to do their assessment. And they coordinate the repair with internal departments as needed. A lot of times, if it falls in Public Utilities, they may coordinate with my department, Public Works, or a lot of times we have to get engineering involved, Kevin Bulbrick's department, or sometimes Parks and Rec if it's a sprinkler or a tree root issue that's contributing to the flooding or standing water. And we document the actions taken and keep all parties informed. And another thing I'm proud of, the work that Matt put into this. He also trained some of the engineering staff. We developed a database and KPIs, key performance indicators, for the issues that are deferred to engineering. So a lot of times, if it's an issue that we can't fix in-house, then we then need engineering support to help develop a project or a design to help fix the issue.
Hold on, Josh, we have a question.
Yes, sir.
Just a quick question about that last, it's a dashboard. Is that available on the website or is that an internal dashboard?
It's internal for now, but we can make it available.
Just curious. Thank you.
You're welcome. And there's a prioritization process for engineering or capital improvement projects that we worked on as well. So some of our last couple slides, you'll see how we ranked some of the projects that are going to be engineering or capital improvement projects. So a few examples. This is a call that we received on Murray Road. You can see the first picture. This was taken by our crews that responded to the call. And on the next day, June 28th, the water was gone. It's a different angle, but it's the same street. So this isn't ideal, but what is important to remember is water stands on roadways sometimes. It's not the ideal situation when you build, like a Banyan Boulevard. You won't necessarily see this on Banyan Boulevard, but some of our older streets, sometimes water stands on roadways for a certain period of time. But if it doesn't, it's pretty common in industry, 48 hours. If it's gone within 48 hours, and there's nothing that we do. So no further action was needed on this one except for responding to the resident to let them know. In Ardmore Road, again, this is, water stays on roadways. That's how they're designed. Water doesn't, if it needs to go to a drainage, so a lot of times water will be on the roadway. So this is the pictures taken by our stormwater crews from Public Utilities. So September 21st, and the water was gone September 22nd. So again, no further action was needed. And this is just a look of the checklist that our crews completed.
We have a question from Commissioner Lambert.
Yes.
Just a quick question. In that report, does it state, are these heavy rains, typical rains?
Not always. I mean, we reply regardless if it's a heavy rain, but you'll see some tidal flooding on some of our next slides. And there's one that was a pretty significant rain event on Argyle Road. But this one, I don't know what the date was, but it was September 21st. So it was during rainy season. So it was, we respond regardless, and the first people that go out is stormwater.
Thank you.
And here's Costello Road. So this is pretty common concern that we get called into our department. And this actually ends up being a public works. It stays in our shop to fix. So we attempted to fix this. In years past, a common practice was they overlaid the road. Rather than mill and pave, they just placed asphalt over and over. So they created these high spots or low spots throughout the streets. And you can see in this, the water was standing in a driveway apron. So in order for us to fix this, we attempted a couple of different methods. But in order for us to fix this, we have to replace the driveway apron, which is pretty costly. And to do that, we would also do several other aprons on this street. So it wasn't a favorable response that we provided to the resident. It was unfavorable. So it's something that we're working on with communications to make sure that we're on the same page.
Josh, I don't know if
Yes.
you're going to explain it a little bit later, but maybe when you talk about like this example, some of the things we're looking at in order to prioritize. So the health and safety, or I don't know if that's something you get into later, or
Yeah, it's
is it? Okay.
No, that's a great point, Armand. And let me get back to a previous slide. So this is the checklist that our crews. So the first crew that responds to the call or the concern is our stormwater crew. So they go through, and if it's not, it has to meet the threshold criteria. If it doesn't pass at least one of these threshold criteria, then we don't address it at all. So it's safety. That's priority one. So you can see health and safety was one example would be, is there an injury? Priority two is disruption to services. So that could be mail, it could be utilities, etc. And then also property damage. So that's this particular one. The water stood for more than 48 hours on Costello Road, so we did address it. But it falls extremely low on our priority list.
Mayor.
Now, Argyle Road, this
I have a
is,
question from Commissioner
Yes.
Ward.
It sounds like your response time is pretty quick then. I mean, for a huge city, and we do have quite a few areas that have flooding concerns. So what is your usual response time?
it's within 48 hours.
Okay.
Typically for utilities, they have personnel on call 24 hours a day. When they get the call, and I was the assistant director for public utilities, so I work with those guys really closely, but they're able to respond within 48 hours. If it's a public works, if it gets turned over to public works or parks, we usually respond within 48 hours as well. And I could say the same for parks.
Do you all keep cumulative data over an annual basis? How many calls you got in per year? How many of those were either low priority, high priority? Just an annual report on.
Yes, if a work order is created, we do keep track of that. We don't have the amount that are low priority. That's a KPI or metric that we could create if that's something you want to see. But we do track how many calls we get, and if a work order is created to address that, we do keep track of that.
And the average time to resolve a situation, you keep that?
No, we don't. That's
data?
something that we could do as well.
Okay, if you could provide us at least with the annual numbers, how many calls you got in, so that we, members of the dais, could just have a sense as to how responsive we are to our citizens. You know, we hear the negative stuff, right? I called months ago and nothing ever happened, but it would be nice to see actual data as to how responsive we're being as a city, so we have that in our back pocket.
Definitely.
Could you get that to us,
Yes.
please? And say over the last couple, or however long you've been doing it, but at least the last year and the year before that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So here's an example.
Real
Go
quick
ahead,
to
I'm sorry.
clarify, though, this process is fairly new, I think.
Okay.
This has been, what, less than a year?
So we put the process in place a little over a year ago.
About a year ago, okay.
But we've had the work order system in place for 3 or 4 years, so we can track how many work orders we've created. As far as whether or not it's a priority, low priority, or high priority, that's something that we could look into.
Yeah, but just even have the information as to how many work orders you got in and responded to would be helpful.
All right,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So here's Argyle Road. This is our stormwater crews that responded to this, and following the process, before it becomes an engineering project, they always look and see if something interim can be done to address the situation. So the picture on the left, you can see, let me go back and take that off there. So you can, it's hard to tell, but you can see where an interim solution was we installed a swale. The picture on the right was taken after a pretty significant rain event. I don't have a before picture before we installed the swale, but installing the swale helped out this resident or helped out this neighborhood. You can see it's not ideal. There's a lot of water standing on the roadway. So when we go through the criteria assessment, when we're establishing the prioritization process, Kevin's team, they actually establish this, and it's a lower priority. And we have some higher priorities that we'll show you on the next couple slides.
Josh, can you real quick just explain what a swale is? Because sometimes we get calls actually because of standing water in swales, so just explain what a swale is for.
So a swale is used to treat the stormwater. It's part of the treatment process of stormwater. It's used. You can see, it's hard to tell in this picture, but there's a curb cut in the picture on the left, and that allows some of the stormwater to get off the roadway into the swale, and then it treats the stormwater before it goes to its final destination.
All right, so give me some perspective. This is the same street. Now, is the picture on the right after the swell was installed?
Yes,
or-
sir. Again, we don't have a before picture. I couldn't find a before picture before the swale was installed.
Okay, so it was even worse flooding.
It was even
Right,
worse.
before the swale, you wouldn't even have, you probably wouldn't have access in the middle like you do
Okay,
there.
all right.
You couldn't see the center line of the road. And this becomes an engineering project. It's sent to engineering. Again, an interim solution was to install the swale, but the long-term solution is to install piping, which will then tie into the Washington Roads project, which is underway right now.
Okay, thank you. We have a question.
What was there before the swale, and when did the swale get installed?
So the swale was installed a couple years ago. Well, actually, probably 3 years ago. I was still in utilities. So before the swale, it was just flat grass. You know, we have a parkway is the green area between the curb and the sidewalk. It's usually There's landscaping, it's a flat area. A swale is like a V, and it's used to treat the stormwater, so we installed the swale. But
You know
before
what
that,
would
it was
also
just grass.
be helpful to us, and again, I'm trying to position us to be responsive to citizens, is to have information, even though it's an interim solution, when you take steps, particularly maybe break it out district by district, when you're taking steps to address these issues.
Okay.
If there could be some kind of report or something that goes to certainly the district commission, me as mayor and the district commissioner, so that we're getting a sense that the city is working, right?
Okay.
But we need data to help us with that. So as part of your protocols going forward, when some action like this is taken in a particular district, if there could be a note to let the mayor and the district commissioner know that on such and such a date, we did X in your district, and, you know, if they want to follow up or at least send a note to the citizen, and, you know, I don't know, but we can use that information proactively and productively.
That would help us. So
Thank you.
And we can work with
Commissioner
Jennifer's
Fox,
team.
President Fox.
Thank you, Josh. I'm curious if there is a typical amount of time for the water to leave the swale. I know that I've had calls from residents that have that, and there's still water, and they're still worried about it. So this is something maybe helpful for us to know if there's a typical time for that to drain, that if they're already the lucky ones that have a swale, I guess, that they should be, you know, not calling us about the drainage issues.
It all depends. If it's the rainy season, if the ground is saturated, this happens to be close to Washington Road, so the water table is pretty high. You have tidal issues that you're dealing with on the south end, especially close to Washington Road. So it all depends on the location. I know that's not the greatest
recognize
answer,
it's
but
the street, so
it depends.
But Josh,
I need more.
generally looking at 48 hours, right, is sort of a metric.
For the swale, yes, as long as you don't get additional rain, and then you have, in some cases, we've seen that irrigation contributes to the issue. So you got to make sure the irrigation isn't contributing to the flooding or the standing water. But that's pretty common in industry to use the 48-hour rule. And here's another example. This is a medium priority. This is something we saw, and this was actually taken in November this year, the king high tides that we're having right around Hurricane Ian. One of the reasons this becomes a higher priority is the water. This is tidal flooding, so you have salt water. It damages the asphalt a lot quicker than regular rainwater does, stormwater. And you have a critical public utilities facility. It's a lift station at the corner of Bloomfield and Flagler. So the last thing you want is stormwater going into your sanitary sewer system. That creates a bunch of issues that Victor does not want to deal with. So this is another reason why it becomes a higher priority for us, as opposed to one of the low priorities, which is, you know, water standing in someone's.
And then we're actually working on an engineering solution to this. We have designed to install a tidal valve at this location, which is going to require some additional underground drainage infrastructure. And so we're actually getting a proposal for that right now, and we hope to have this particular situation resolved probably by next February or March, once we get the pricing in and the contract underway, and if there's any lead time on materials or whatever. But our goal is to get this done by spring at Bloomfield Drive.
And again, Kevin, as you develop that plan of action, if that's something that could just be summarized and given to me as the mayor and the district commissioner, so just so they have that information in case there's a question or a resident expresses dissatisfaction, you know, that way we have the information at hand to respond directly. I know we can send you emails and that type of thing, but if we have it proactively in a file somewhere, then we can address it more promptly.
And Mayor Commissioner, that's going to be actually part of what they're doing is entering the data of the response within this what's it called, the smart sheet. So yeah, they're capturing that. It'll be easy to share that. Yeah.
Thank you.
When a project ends up in engineering, if we need designs or it needs to become a CIP project, it's captured on the smart sheet that Armando mentioned. And we could look at making that public for everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So here's another example, and this happens to be on Flagler Drive again on the north end. So this is 3415 North Flagler Drive, and again, it's high priority for us. When we establish the criteria and the severity assessment criteria for engineering projects, We looked at repetitive losses, that's one of the criteria. Access to ADA access, property damage. So again, this was tidal flooding and some rainwater as well, stormwater. But the majority of what you see right here is tidal flooding, and the salt water damages asphalt, at a rapid rate. So you can, and it also kills some of the landscaping. So this is something that elevated to a higher priority level.
And this one also, we're obviously working on this as an engineering solution to that. This is up there where we're going to install additional drainage piping in the North Flagler area and separate out the various neighborhoods and add additional outfalls up there at the former Holly property on North Flagler, and have tidal valves installed at those so that we have a greater capacity for the storm drain water to drain out into the Lake Worth Lagoon, and also to prevent the tidal flooding from coming back in. And so currently it's in a situation where the one outfall pipe is not large enough to be able to handle all of the demand that's coming from the street flooding or the street drainage. And so we're working on that. We hope to put that out to bid and start working on this project next summer.
Thank you. We do have a question from Commissioner Ward.
And this goes to the priority, so thank you for that timeline, because I was going to ask that. But when it comes to that being a priority or a high priority versus like a medium priority, how then is the time frame coming in? Are you pushing those projects first? Because like the last one was a medium priority, but it's going to be done in spring versus this is going to be in the summer.
It depends on the complexity of the solution. In this particular case, in the North Flagler Drive, that's a much more complex solution because it involves designing drainage systems throughout the adjacent neighborhoods that are to the west of this location, and that has taken a lot more time than the design that we needed to put together for how we're going to put the tidal valve in and adding piping so that we can do that more efficiently. And so depends on the complexity of the solution as far as what the timing of when we actually implement that will be. So North Flagler, more complex. It has a different process. It's going to be more expensive. We have to put it out to bid. All those factors involved makes that time frame and the start date of when we want to do something about it a little bit later than something what we can implement with less procurement steps, as well as a lower cost. And so that's how that kind of works. So it varies.
So, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this is not a perfect science. We try to make it as precise as we can in terms of how we prioritize. But sometimes there's opportunity projects. So if we're doing repaving is already scheduled, that may be an opportunity to adjust or fix a flooding issue on that street, because we're going to be repaving anyway. That's an example of where it may not be the highest priority, but because we're doing a project anyway, we're just going to include the flooding in there. Or there could be something like that apron that could be done fairly quickly in-house, even though it's a very low priority. So sometimes opportunities arise where you're going to do something a little bit faster, or as Kevin just mentioned, the complexity of projects may require years of design and getting the funding in place to do something.
Just to follow up, but what changes in the back end when you declare something a high priority? What processes in your staff or how you guys operate that reflects it being a high priority, regardless of complexity?
Well, if it's a high priority, we're going to start working on what it is that we ultimately need to do to solve the problem, and that's going to involve establishing funding to be able to pay for, if we need to do some design efforts, we may have to hire a consultant to do that. So we would start those processes once we determine that something was a high priority. And again, that doesn't happen overnight. In this particular case, we've been working on this now for probably close to 2 years. But again, with the complexity of it, it's taken that long for us to come up with a solution. We're finishing up the design. We have everybody on board to do that, and we can put this out to bid. So sometimes things take a little bit longer, or they take a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, it's in a reasonable time frame for the steps that need to take place in order for us to ultimately solve these problems. And so,
but budgeting is a big one. So getting the funding, and in this particular example, we went out to a grant to help fund this project, and we've gotten that grant. Now we're waiting for the final grant agreement. So we have a prioritization for grant applications too, and if it falls in a high priority area, then that's going to get priority of us going for grants.
Just as an aside, I'm sorry, but this is one of those moments, like the mayor said, that I would love just a process of when this started, what you guys have all done, because again, when you guys do get grant funding, that's great, and we're appreciative, but because this has been such a hot topic, it would be nice to share that with the residents, say, this is what your city staff has been doing since 2020 to get this problem underway, and this is why it's taken so long, and all the steps that we needed to do, so that they realize that even though it's taken a long time, it was still high priority and all the steps have been made in a proper amount of time.
No, that's a great point. I mean, we had to acquire a property. That was one thing we had to do just to get this done, a property that was on Flagler, which is not easy to get, as you can imagine, in this environment. So yes, that's a good idea for us to do that.
Can I mention the smart sheet too? Another benefit of having a smart sheet and having this project on a smart sheet is so you don't lose sight of it. You can track it from the beginning to the end and make sure it doesn't. Some other stuff may float to the top above this, most likely not, but this prevents that from happening where you lose track of something. So I think having a smart sheet and having the key performance indicators and tracking the project and the progress of it is going to be beneficial too.
It's one thing to have it internally, and I'm glad we're doing that, but the commissioner raises a very good point. We're the boots on the ground, all right? So when we're going out to the public, something like this, they may think the city's doing nothing. So the information you provide us helps us to counter
Understood.
that argument. You know, I know how hard staff works, but the perception sometimes is that you all are just sitting here eating bonbons and sitting on your hands. And we know that's not the case.
Yeah.
But we need that data in order to make to have that conversation in our districts to let them know, yes, we're aware of the problem. We're not ignoring the problem. These are the steps that we've taken to address the problem.
I agree. That's very important.
Let me just add a footnote.
President Fox, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just want to add a footnote to the requests, for reports and all. That is something that, we are working on across the board with providing the district commissioners, and in this case, it seemed like all commissioners would like to have reports on this water issue, but providing reports and updates on key projects that are happening in your district. I think we have heard that request prior, and it's something that we're looking at putting some sort of format in place that will work across the board so that you all will have it. But certainly we will make certain you get the reports on this particular matter.
And we're not trying to make busy work for you, but it helps us do our job more effectively, and it takes a lot of pressure off of you guys, quite frankly, if we have that information. So, I know you're busy trying to keep the main thing, as young people say, but having these reports will help us to make the argument to our constituents and our residents that we are really addressing these issues.
And that's what we need help with, so I appreciate that. I don't think it's busy work. Amy Marks, she's our customer service, or she's our administrative manager. She'll definitely appreciate that. Anything that can help her team out as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's busy work. I think it's really important. So
Commissioner Lambert.
I was just going to add, but you commented on that, Josh, that I don't think it's busy work either, because I do think that your staff probably gets waylaid by all the questions and people wanting updates. So the more we can be proactive, I think the better the city will be more efficient. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. I know at one point we had a map of where all the tidal valves were going, so I don't know if there's an update on that, or if some of them have been installed and how they're working. I haven't heard a lot about that, but.
There is a map that shows all the locations that we've identified. We have currently working, we've installed 7 so far, and they are working. We're going to continue to do that. We have another 7 coming up that we're putting out to bid. That's also reflective of the grant that we received last year. The $100,000 grant will help to contribute to that, as well as this Bloomfield location, which is kind of a special case because it requires additional piping and infrastructures to be able to make the tidal valve work, rather than just sticking it on the outfall pipe that's on the other side of the seawall, which is the easiest way of doing it. There are also 8 other locations that involve very large diameter outfalls that we are working on the design for what needs to be done at each one of those locations. That's a special circumstance at each one of those. That's probably not going to finish up until maybe May. We'll get that finally finished out, and then we'll put those out to bid and work on those. And so we're progressively working more aggressively to try to get this stuff implemented, but it has taken some time, but I think we're on a good momentum now and track that we're going to be able to do this in a more steady fashion. And so it's taken some time to get its legs, but it's walking fast right now, and hopefully we'll be running next year, okay?
And President Fox, I also have an update on the Tidal Vow program dialed into the work session schedule. So the board will be getting a full presentation and a work session on where we've been, where we are, and then what we're projecting for the future.
Commissioner Ward.
And just to follow up on the same conversation, because WPB I'm assuming is where I'm telling all residents to go in and monitor things for purposes of either the smart sheet or a dashboard, to have that be. So if somebody is new in this area, just bought a house and wants to make that complaint, that if they are trying to, I'm hoping that the system is working, that if they're trying to say, hey, there's crazy flooding on here, that they get pulled into that and say, it's already an existing problem, here's the timeline. And that streamlines that process so that someone isn't then following up with either our office or calling you, which I've, as a resident, I've gotten your cell phone number and called you on things that it's just, again, that's a time-consuming thing, whereas if they are using technology, they'll pull that up and say, oh, man, look, they're already underway, great, good to know, or making a more of an intellectual background comment of, okay, what's this next step versus I'm the first person to complain about this. I think that'd be helpful in the app.
Yeah, and Commissioner, we actually discussed WPB-Key as part of this process, and we've identified there's a kind of deficiency there in how it's not intuitive if you're reporting flooding on that system. So we're going to talk to Tiffany and others about putting the right wording in there so people get directed to the right place.
So we talked about this briefly, managing resident expectations. I think we got some good feedback on how we can help us with that. So we're also working on developing effective and consistent communications to residents in instances when, one, funding is not available for high priority projects, so that does happen on occasion. Repairs are not high priority based on the established criteria. Again, that's not always a favorable message that we deliver to the residents. They don't want to hear that, and I can't blame them. You know, you want to make sure that your road is draining properly. And also, concerns have been repeatedly repeated for the same location or by the same resident on a lower priority item, or even a high priority item for that matter. You know, it's oftentimes you can see the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that we're following this process, and that doesn't happen.
Commissioner Lambert.
I think along the same lines as that is, you've given some examples of what are high, medium, and low priorities and why some of them are higher or lower than others. But do you have a criteria that you use to help determine that? I know that somebody said it's not an exact science, but being able to communicate that ahead of time would be very helpful as well.
We could share those documents, right? Yeah, we have they're on the presentation briefly, but we do have.
Yeah, there is a criteria. So
Yes.
if are you asking for just a copy of what the criteria are so that you can provide it, or
Well, I think
to
when you're
inform
talking
residents?
about managing resident expectations, I think that's part of it, because
We
I know
can
that.
summarize that criteria for
Yes.
you as opposed to giving you a bunch of documents,
Right.
because yes, like the health and safety issue is one, right? The access to services, you know, all those things are what develops the actual prioritization. So yeah, if you have standing water in your apron, it's gone within 24 hours. That's clearly not going to meet the same priority as the flooding you saw in Flagler. So I think most people understand that if they see it. Yeah.
I don't know that they do understand that all
Well,
the
you're right.
time.
It's always going to be my front yard is
Right,
the most important
it's their
thing.
front,
Right?
exactly.
Yes.
Just to follow up on that, because if you're working on the app, like for instance, say someone does that and it's flagged, like, yes, we have this low priority, they could click on that. What are those low priority? And there are a couple bullets of identifying what low priority means is a helpful tool. And I think that could be easily kind of worked into while you're trying to figure out how to identify this in the app to be able to do that.
Yeah, I
Whether
think we
it's
can work that
flashed,
into
hey, it's yellow,
WPB-Key.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And that's a good segue to the next one. City Commissioner and aides can play an active role in helping to set reasonable citizen expectations on standing water issues that are classified as low priority based on the established criteria. So I think we have some good feedback on how we can make that happen, or make that a better process. Are there any additional questions or comments?
Just generally, this is very helpful, and I think the conversation is helpful for us to understand, and I'm probably more knowledgeable since I deal with staff every day, but for us to understand what's going on behind the scenes, for the commissioners to understand that, you know, and I can attest that the staff really is working hard every day to address these issues, but I think it's important to kind of get a peek behind the scenes for this body, get a peek behind the scenes to see what is going on. And I think it's important for you to hear from us what information will be helpful as we are trying to deal with sometimes angry, frustrated residents and constituents so that we could do our jobs better. So I enjoy the conversation, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we have our homework, so we appreciate it.
Yeah. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, very good report. Thank you all.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
And we're going to shift on to the next presentation. If I can have the Housing Authority team to come to the head table, as well as our Housing Community Development Director. And Mayor, I'll turn it over to you to tee this item up.
Yeah, while they're coming up, just wanted to express my excitement and enthusiasm about what we are about to hear. As you all may recall, I don't know, but maybe about a year ago, several months ago, we made the decision not to renew the lease for something that was called Henrietta Farms or whatever. I believed that there was a higher and better use for that land. And so what you're going to hear today is what we are proposing. But there was also some outcry, some blowback, that we were removing a community farm, community garden, from a food desert, an area of the city that was a food desert. And I also believed that there was a more effective way of providing community gardening opportunities, not only in that one location, but throughout our city. So we did have, we announced a partnership with Florida A&M University to come to our city and engage in a more robust community garden program. And I just want to give a brief update on that. That's not what we're talking about today, but it's related. So I just want to give commissioners a brief update on where we are with the community garden aspect of this. FAMU has hired an extension agent to support that partnership and programs here in the city. And that individual will actually be relocating to our city in the new year. That's a full-time position, and there's a part-time position that is still open. Some of the program, and we've actually started some of this, FAMU is going to have, they've launched the program at Gaines Park. There's been a food distribution operation at Phipps Park in partnership with FarmShare. We've conducted some virtual nutrition programs, some virtual community programs, and I believe they have started, or at least are embarking upon starting, participating in our green market to get the word out. Coleman Park Community Garden will be opening sometime next month, and then there will be grand openings of community gardens at Pleasant City and Phipps Park in the second quarter of 2023. So we are proceeding down dual paths here. You'll hear more about what we're going to do with the former Henrietta Garden site, but I didn't want you to think that we had dropped the ball on the community garden aspect. We're rolling out a much more robust community garden plan in partnership with FAMU. So it's just an update on that. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the commission staff, and those members of the public watching the work session. For the record, Faye Johnson, City Administrator for the City of West Palm Beach. This is going to be a joint presentation between myself and the Executive Director of the West Palm Beach Housing Authority, Ms. Linda Odom. But before I start in, I would like to just introduce, in addition to Ms. Odom at the head table, the other two members of her team whom will be working with the city on this partnership. We have Lisa Maxwell, who is a development consultant for the Housing Authority. Ms. Maxwell and I actually have worked together during my days at the City of Fort Lauderdale in the affordable housing arena, so she comes well-versed and highly experienced. And then we have Charlotte Burnett, who is the General Counsel and Director of Development for the Housing Authority. And then next to her, we have our very own Jennifer Ferrio, who is the key member of the city's team with me in the development of this initiative. So with that, I'm going to get started. So just by way of the details of the configuration of the property, this is property that is city-owned. It is located at 1400 Henrietta Avenue, and it intersects with 15th Street. The property is approximately 1.59 acres. It has an estimated market value of $318,000 plus. It is currently zoned as CPCS, which stands for Coleman Park Community Service. And you see pictures of what the property looked like back in August of 2021. In terms of the project goal, certainly we want to redevelop the 1.5 acre site as a flagship rental housing development for families. And it's important to underscore that this development is intended to serve families here within our city with the availability of off-site supportive wraparound services. Those services are not intended to be housed within the development, but to be provided at off-site location and through off-site agencies. It is proposed to be a development partnership between the city of West Palm Beach, the West Palm Beach Housing Authority, as well as Palm Beach County. And it may be expanded to include other parties as we identify them and secure them. And I think we probably will end up with other parties when we look at the supportive wraparound services aspect as well as the financing aspect of the project. And we'll talk more about that. I have had the initial conversation with the county administrator, Ms. Baker, about the county partnering with us on this development, and she was favorable to doing that. The West Palm Beach Housing Authority will serve as the lead developer and the facility operator. In terms of the proposed project concept, as I indicated, it is proposed to be a rental development for families, specifically a townhome rental development facility. The target clientele is proposed for families earning 80% or less of the area median income. In terms of the zoning requirement, in order to do the proposed townhome rental development, it would be required to rezone the property from its current zoning of community service to MF 14. We think that it will hold approximately 9 to 18 townhomes under the current zoning. And as the board is aware, you've just approved interim standards for House Bill 1339. It is very possible under that provision we may be able to increase the number of units, and of course depending on the design of the units. The city would look to process that rezoning and any environmental assessments that would be needed. Moving right along, under the proposed project concept, we're proposing in terms of the property ownership to deed restrict the property, convey it to the housing authority with deed restrictions, because we want to make certain that it codifies the various requirements in terms of who would be served in a number of other terms. The housing authority needs to have ownership of the property as they meet with the county in terms of securing funding. There is a requirement that would need to be met when you go to get funding from the state government and various other potential financing sources. Just by way of example for the board, in the past, the city has transferred ownership of city-owned property to nonprofit housing developers to help us with affordable housing. We've done that in the case of the Housing Authority as it relates to the Mary Place development. Another example would be single-family lots to Habitat for Humanity, and it has also been done with Neighborhood Renaissance in terms of single-family as well as rental developments. So it would not be creating a precedent. This is a practice that we utilize on an ongoing, regular basis. But there are some threshold issues as it relates to moving the partnership forward and actually seeing the units in the ground. And of course, funding is always usually the biggest one. We're estimating that the development cost is plus or minus $6 million. You can't firm up what that is until we actually get into development, but that's a pretty good estimate. In terms of how that development cost would be covered, right now there is $1.6 million thereabouts that the city has been awarded under the Home American Rescue Program funds. Now, this is separate and apart from the $12.5 million that we got from the federal government. And so that is a potential source that will be requested to be allocated to this project. Certainly, there is potential county funding that is available that we could go after, state funding, as well as we're hoping that this will be an opportunity for private sector funding to be brought to the project as well. And as I mentioned before, we would be working with the authority to look at potential other funding sources that have not yet been identified. The other threshold issues that relates to financing, would be maintaining the development and keeping it in a pristine condition. So that relates to your operating costs. And those operating costs, as it stands right now, are to be determined. In terms of potentiality, one potential would be the allocation of HUD vouchers, but that would depend on the structure of the rental facility. As we initially explored this concept and this partnership, we were envisioning this development to perhaps be sort of a stopgap respite for families who, for one reason or another, found themselves in need of temporary housing so that they can regroup and get on their feet. If we were to look at HUD vouchers, that particular model may not be permissible. We would also look potentially at what would be collected through minimum rent payments. Again, this development is to help families be able to get back on their feet where need be. There is potential funding from the county as well as the private sector and the state funding. But operating costs tend to be the most challenging to secure. Most of the funding money that is out there like to put money toward bricks and mortar. So we know that we have some work to do here in terms of the operational costs of maintaining the facility. So with that, I'll pause here before Ms. Odom comes up, and we want the board to have an opportunity to hear the Housing Authority's capacity to partner with us on this initiative to get a presentation of some of the developments that they have done. You all are probably well aware of it firsthand, but we're moving into a new partnership and certainly want to refresh the board's memory on the capability that they have and the track record that they have. and then I'll come back and pick up the presentation. So, Mayor, I'll pause here if there are any questions.
I think Commissioner Lambert has a question, and then Commissioner Ward.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to see the presentation and to learn more about this opportunity. I'm very grateful for the West Palm Beach Housing Authority's partnership and doing work in our city. I'm just curious, Administrator Johnson, how did we end up selecting them for the partner on this project?
Primarily, as we looked at the type of development that we wanted on that site and the targeted clientele, and knowing some of the challenges that would come with the financing of the development, and then certainly the operational costs. Certainly, we had a number of options in terms of how we could have proposed the partnership. One would have been just through an RFP process, whereby you put it out and then you allow developers to maybe submit qualifications. Typically, when you go through that process, just in my experience, and it certainly could differ if the board elects to go down that road, which we don't recommend, is that they look for the municipality to take the lead on providing all of the financing as well as ongoing operational costs. We think the Housing Authority is probably the best situated to help minimize what would be needed from the city. So just from our experience with working with them, they have done an excellent job working with this clientele, know the community, they are a known commodity. So there were a number of qualitative factors that we took into consideration.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ward?
Thank you. And being the liaison now, I've gotten a chance to see what great members you guys have. And so it is a really great wealth of knowledge that you guys have, and the conversation has been great. I just wanted to ask, because I don't know if I just missed this, the deed restriction, how long is that time period going to be?
It is not yet defined. Again, that's one of the many steps that we would have to work through as we put the development agreement in place. That development agreement would come back to the board. So this is the beginning step to present the concept to the board, to get, hopefully at the end of this, support from the board to move in this direction. And if we were to do that, as you'll see in a later slide, we will come to the board for a number of actions to be considered by the board and hopefully approved, and then we will start working with the Housing Authority on those details. There are quite a bit of details and actions that will have to be taken from this point to actually bringing a project out of the ground.
And then my second question is, and I realize knowing that we're in a beginning stage on this, but considering the goals are, one, getting people housing, and two, a big one is upward mobility, and I get maybe financing is involved in this, why we chose rental versus ownership, and maybe Ms. Odom will get into that as well, but what was the basis behind sticking with rentals versus being able to purchase?
The city is proposing rental as opposed to home ownership, but that certainly is a policy call. From a staff perspective, we're proposing rental just from the standpoint of the need for families that we're seeing in our city who are either near homeless or becoming homeless because they happen to miss one paycheck, or there is some type of medical emergency where they are struggling to maintain a roof over their head. If you follow some of the recent discussions that have played out with the school districts, where we have families living in cars with kids that are enrolled in our school system, having to come out of a vehicle and then report to class and function. That's one of the target groups that potentially this stopgap type of housing, could be made available to. We think that it will just be a better service for our community, because we actually have, from my perspective, a deficit in our city in terms of the type of rental facility and the benefits that this will provide. Now, certainly, home ownership is always the preferred. We're looking to get families into homes, but we have a number of just through the workforce housing efforts that we have with private developers trying to target that population. So we're just trying to do a combination of different types of mechanism that will help at least address some of the affordable housing crises that we see on the rental side as well as home ownership. And just for the board's point of information, directly across the street from this proposed site, the city owned a number of lots, I believe maybe 5 or 6, that we donated or transferred to the Urban League, and they are putting single-family homes or proposed to put single-family homes on those lots. So we're working on a combination of different types of housing.
Any other questions? Okay, you can continue. Thank you.
Okay, I will turn it over to Ms. Odom, the Executive Director of the West Palm Beach Housing Authority.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank the city for considering us as a partner in this proposed project. Yes, is that better? Yes. Yeah, thank the city again for considering us as a partner in this proposed project on Henrietta. I'll be reviewing a few highlights as to who we are as an agency and our capacity. So you know us as the West Palm Beach Housing Authority. You also, we are also the housing center of the Palm Beaches. This housing center represents our non-HUD activities or enterprise properties. So we are mission-led. We provide safe, decent, and affordable housing to individuals that are have very limited financial resources. Because we are mission-led, we are committed to ensuring that we serve a greater social purpose. We provide housing and support individuals who are traditionally marginalized and of course, disproportionately affected by the affordable housing crisis. So it is important to also know that we are a governmental entity, and that because of that, we have access to a variety of funding sources that can allow for development projects. We also we are well equipped to provide the coordination of services for, to serve individuals that are low and extremely low income. And of course, we have demonstrated our commitment to our communities. So as a public housing authority, we own and manage 1,091 affordable housing units in Palm Beach County. Of that 1,091, 439 are HUD-RAD developments and public housing. The rest are tax credits and affordable housing. We also administer 4,081 Section 8 housing choice vouchers in the private market. We're also a developer, and we have a team of professionals who are very experienced and have the knowledge and the skills to deliver a high quality development projects. So our development entities, and you see we have here today Lisa Maxwell, our development consultant, and our Director of Development and General Counsel, Charlotte Burnett. So we are a developer, and our developer entities are known as Baobab Development and Magnolia Affordable Development. We're also a licensed general contractor, meaning that we can complete many of our construction projects. We're also a CHODO, and through our Pine Ridge Holistic Living Center, we are eligible for home funds. And we're also a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, meaning we can provide professional housing counseling for prospective home buyers, renters, for such services such as credit repair, budgeting, and financial management. So going a little bit into our development experience. So between 2002 and 2006, the West Palm Beach Housing Authority assembled 14.67 acres in the Pleasant City neighborhood. And we partnered with Bank of America CDC. and we
Could, I
built-
don't know if there's something wrong with the mic, but
You're not hearing me?
it's difficult. I don't know.
Maybe I just speak extremely. Maybe I'm too close. Spot, okay. Yeah, so between 2002 and 2006, is that better?
That's fine. Thank you.
We, the Housing Authority assembled 14.6 acres of land in in the Pleasant City neighborhood. So we partnered with Bank of America CDC, and we built Mary Place Apartments, which is a 122 8-unit in Pleasant City. And it was a $23 million project. The city of West Palm Beach, a CRA, contributed $9 million in infrastructure improvements, and it was a 9% tax credit deal. So this is a picture of the Mary Place Apartments. And so on the remaining land, approximately 9 acres, we started the build-out in 2015. And this piece of land we call, the rest of the land we call Mary Place Estates. And as a licensed general contractor, we started out and we built, to date we built 8 single-family homes. We have also partnered with Pulte and the county, and 34 townhomes and 2 single-family homes have already been completed. Here are some pictures of the single-family homes that the West Palm Beach Housing Authority built, and townhomes, Pulte townhomes. So in the Coleman Park area, on 17 acres of land, we had 246 old public housing units built in 1941. So we demolished those. They became old and obsolete. So we demolished those, and we started out, we built Sable Palm, 9 units along Tamarind Avenue. Then Paul Lawrence Dunbar, Senior Community, Silver Palm Place for families, Royal Palm Place, with a preference for vets, and this is for seniors, and in all, total investment of over $65 million. And the financing used on these included a private investment loan insured by a 221D4, a 9% and 4% tax credits, and replacement housing factor funds. Here's a picture of Sable Palm along Tamarind Avenue. And this is Paul Lawrence Dunbar, or Senior Complex, 99 units. Silver Palm Place for families. Royal Palm Place for the elderly with a preference for veterans. So let's go into a little bit about the current projects that we're also working on. So we've partnered with Landmark, and we're building 106 elderly units in the Westgate area of Palm Beach County. We also have a developer agreement with the Board of County Commissioners to build 17 cottage-style homes. These are the small lot concept type homes, and these are out in West Palm Beach between Military and Clements, and we will be breaking ground in January of 2023. Another big project going on currently is the redevelopment of Southridge. Southridge was built in 1940. It's old, it's obsolete. We put out an RFP. We partnered with Smith & Hensey. On an 11-acre site, we plan to build in 2 or 3 phases up to 348 units of elderly and family. Do you want us to go? These are just homes. The city talked about different styles of homes that they're considering for the Henrietta project, and we just have some pictures here as to what it possibly could look like. You see 3 stories, allowing you to get more apartments, more homes fitting in one lot. These are just some basic pictures here, what it could look like. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you all have any questions for Ms. Odom before I wrap it up?
President
You can
Fox.
come back up. Oh, okay, you got the map there.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was curious when you were going through some of your other projects, are most of those rentals or are some of them homeowner projects?
So we have 1,091 rentals, okay? 439 of those are HUD and public housing. The ones in Mary Place Estates, those are home ownership. The Mary Place, the first set was 128 units of rentals. The rest of those, the newer ones that we built were all rentals in Mary Place, home ownership in Mary Place Estates.
It sounded like you have your own development team, but there was one photo that said Pulte Townhomes. So I'm wondering,
Yeah.
are there sometimes that you are partnering with developers or?
Yeah, it all depends on what kind of deal we can have work. Pulte needed to satisfy their density bonus. And so they utilized the West Palm Beach Housing Authority land. It was a great partnership with the county, and we were able to get townhomes and a couple single-family homes built.
Yeah, that was the exchange. That was an exchange for having to build workforce housing that the county requires, a workforce housing component like we have in downtown now. That was the off-site component, and they built the off-site at Mary Place.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lambert.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. I had the pleasure of helping a senior woman at Royal Palm Place last year, and she shared a story about the housing condition that she was in before was extremely scary. She was trying to right her life, and where she was living was just having her exposed to some bad elements, and she was just so thrilled and so happy to be in this clean new place, and it allowed her to make friends, get services, and I just wanted to say thank you all so much for these efforts.
Thank you.
I did want to comment upon the question that Commissioner Ward had about the decision that staff is recommending we're heading in toward the rental housing for I think, a vulnerable segment of our community. There's a lot of talk about workforce housing, affordable housing, I call it essential housing, and it covers a lot of different elements or communities, subsects of our communities. I think one that has been under-addressed are the types of families that are either on the verge of homelessness or maybe even homeless, where they just need some transitional housing. And a lot of times I think they get lost in the shuffle or get ignored. And so I believe that the units that we're talking about here can serve a very essential need for a very vulnerable segment of our population that often doesn't get addressed with some of the larger projects. So I believe that as a city, we need to try to look at, take a broad look at the needs that are out there, and again, recognizing that those families who are really on the verge, and it's families, it's not an individual, but a single mother or maybe even a single father with kids who need to be in school, who need a stable home, to have to build housing for them, I think is a very crucial need in our city, and that's part of the thinking that went behind, that is behind the recommendation that we're talking, the direction in which we're headed now. Any other questions? President Fox.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I agree with you. I think that rentals are desperately needed. Curious, I think this slide for the South Bridge said it was 1.1 acres and 348 units, and what we're talking about here is...
No, it's 11 acres.
How many-
Southridge?
How many acres?
Southridge is 11.
Oh, 11, okay. Because I was just curious of how we determined, the townhouses, they're totally, super cute, but I'm just curious if we could build more units if we had a different style, and I'm wondering if that was how you decided on that.
We looked at the townhomes, as the preferred housing type as opposed to just doing apartment units. I think townhomes blend very well with single-family development that will be coming across the street. In terms of the number of units that we will be able to get at the end of the day, it's going to depend on a number of things. Based on the zoning that we would have to go to for MF 14, we think that it will be between 9 and 18 units. But with the interim standards, potentially based on what was proposed to the board, that number will double. But again, it's going to depend on the site design, setbacks, and all of that. So we will be continuously bringing updates to the board on just some of the final details as we get into, working through this.
Any other questions, comments?
Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up, Mayor, here. So in terms of the ask of the board, we're asking for the board's endorsement of the partnership as well as the development concept, your support to convey the property to the West Palm Beach Housing Authority. And should we get that support, we will then look to bring an item to the board to surplus that property and then go through the next steps, as well as support from the board to commit the $1.6 million in the home rescue funds to this project. And again, with that support, we will absolutely go through the various official approval processes. And with that, some of the next steps would entail initiating the rezoning of the property site as well as any environmental assessments, because we would like to have all of that done at the point that we transfer the property to the housing authority, so that that part would be done, and then they can just look toward then going through the development process. As I intimated, we would bring an item to the board for consideration to surplus the property, and that would be done under the leadership of Ms. Furia. And then we would then look at the execution of the conveyance agreement, and that's where we would codify the various restrictions to make certain that if the property is not developed in accordance with the direction, there would be protections to have that property revert back to the city if need be. And with that, Mayor, Commissioners, that concludes the joint presentation. And certainly if there are further questions and discussions, we're happy to entertain those.
Not a question, but a comment. I truly admire the work that the West Palm Beach Housing Authority has done throughout the years, particularly what you did with the old Dunbar housing project site and how you've resurrected that particular parcel and Mary Place as well. And so I look forward to the city partnering with you on this particular project. I can't think of a more highly suited partner that the city can work with on this project. So thank you. Commissioner Ward.
One comment, one question. So I agree, going down, I drive by your projects all the time. I live in that area, and Kirksey just looks so great. And it's such a job well done. And I drive by Mary Place, and the townhomes that are coming up and that are already there, it's just such a great development to drive through and a pride point to have that our city has pushed forward. So kudos on that, because it really did, I think, change those neighborhoods and help those neighborhoods and have more of a pride standpoint. The comment would be, I know that you're asking for our request, but when does community input come in? Because again, we're changing zoning and things like that. I haven't necessarily heard anything, but what's the community outreach look like for the people nearby as far as, hey, we're doing another project in specifically in this area?
We certainly would build in community engagement. You know, we've not yet done that as the first step. We needed to do what we're doing here by way of the work session, but we will, subject to this work session, put together a community engagement sort of plan here as we then move through the next steps, certainly.
One of the advantages of this location is that it's not smack dab in the middle of a neighborhood. It's kind of, I won't say isolated, but it's kind of set apart. So, you know, hopefully we don't run into a lot of the NIMBY attitude that exists when you're talking about affordable workforce housing. So I think this particular location is ideal. I think it abuts a railroad on one side. You know, there's talk about what the Urban League is going to do across the street. They haven't done anything yet, but I don't think that the quality of product that we're going to put up there would be a problem at all. But yeah, we'll do the appropriate community outreach.
And if I could, Mayor, certainly the community engagement is going to be critical. I mean, that's just a fundamental part of different developments that we do here within the city, whether it's the city itself or nonprofit partner or even with the private sector developer. I think it becomes perhaps even more important in this particular instance because there has already been intimation through the media when the lease was not renewed that the development, you know, is going to be of a certain type. So they sort of ran with that story. And then, of course, there are perhaps members in the community, based on what they have been told, have some concerns, and we want to hear those concerns. But once we get support here, we can go into building a community engagement plan based on the conceptual support that we have gotten from the board, and we can talk factually as opposed to perception that has been put out into the community.
President Fox.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask if these become rentals, but at some point we decide that we would rather convert them into an ownership opportunity. Is that something that we can talk about, or is that something that once we agree to this partnership, it's out of our control? I'm just curious what happens in the future.
I think that's always, you know, an option. And if, you know, from a policy standpoint, we get to that place where the board and the mayor wants to see these units converted from rental to home ownership, the type of development, being townhomes, lends itself very well to that. So I think the flexibility would be built in, but certainly we need to see what kind of experience level we're going to have with the development, what will be the needs in terms of having this particular development as a long-term, you know, and so it's just going to depend on a number of factors, but the short answer to the question is that can certainly be done at the policy direction from the board.
Thank you. Just one final question. I assume that this is the case, but working with the Housing Authority, are these going to be affordable housing in a perpetuity?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And I know that early on in your presentation, Administrator Johnson, you talked about the different funding opportunities that we still have. It was not lost on me the difficulty that you said we might run into with the operations funding. So I'm just curious where in this timeline and whose responsibility does that fall on?
We can't give you a specific point in time where that will come into play and would have been solved. But as part of the development process, theoretically, once the Housing Authority gets ownership of the property, they will engage then on going out to get funding, because that puts them in the position. They need to have ownership of the property as they go and talk with the county about what the project is going to be, the projected development costs, if the city were to allocate the 1.6 million, then what they would be looking for in terms of the gap and what the county could consider funding. Is there a potential then to look at some of their other federal funding sources and what that potential amount would be? We, in partnership with them, would be looking at opportunities from the private sector. We've had some private sector groups to indicate they want to support the city's effort, with providing this kind of a niche, housing, what that would look like. So we would be looking at closing that gap on the development side, and then depending on how that's structured, it would then tell us what we need from an operational standpoint. And so it's just going to be an ongoing process, but in terms of the restrictions in the property conveyance, at the end of the day, in order for the housing authority to maintain that ownership and operate this facility, the development costs, the financing plan has to be worked out, as well as the operating costs to maintain the facility. Because one of the things we don't want to have happen is you build a flagship development there and it's not well maintained. We want a development that if anyone were to pass by there, it's not going to stand out like a sore thumb because it's not being well maintained or it's deteriorated. But those are just the kinds of things that you work on and have a plan in place, and we will keep the board updated as we develop those pieces.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Look forward to the partnership. And the only thing I have under Mayor's Matters is I wanted to wish everyone a very happy holiday, and I don't think we're meeting again till after the New Year, so a very happy New Year.
But Mayor, I just want to make certain that I'm right in that we have the support from the endorsement of those actions from the board so that we can move forward.
Yeah, is there a consensus to move forward in this direction? Yes, you are.
Thank you very much.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you, Housing Authority. Ms. Ferrier, thank you for being at the table with us as well.
Commissioners, anything else for the good of the body? Yeah, Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. A couple of times today, the WPB key was brought up, and I'm so grateful for that app, and I know that a number of the commissioners and commission aides have been helping to get the word out about that as well. I was just wondering, I know that Administrator Johnson was helping to facilitate a meeting with Tiffany to help just give some feedback on the WPB key, and I don't know if we have an update on whether or not that meeting got set.
I don't believe that the date has been set, but I'll follow up with Tiffany. I know we were trying to do some coordination of dates, but I don't think that the specific date has been set yet, but we'll get it calendared.
And I just want to say, how much work and energy and money went into creating that. I know we all want it to be successful. So in any way that the commissioners or the commission aides can be of support to that, I would love to, have a meeting, whether that's individually or a work session where we can talk about what's going well, ways to tweak it, ways that we can make it most efficient for our residents. That would be great.
And if possible, to have it as a workshop, then we could have a public meeting, because I know a lot of us are having issues that we were going to meet with Tiffany, but only one of us could meet, and so that's fine too. Our aides can help meet on our behalf, but it's fantastic to have the resource, but I think we're all running into different issues that it would be great to share collectively.
And that's fine. I think Ms. Johnson was working on scheduling that, but I would also say I'm not sure that we have to wait for that meeting. If you have particular issues that come up, certainly get that information to Tiffany. We have a project manager in place that's helping us tweak it. And anytime you roll out new technology, there are going to be some bumps in the road as well. But my view is that if you've got specific concerns, problems, issues, let's try to communicate that sooner rather than later. But I know that Ms. Johnson is working on putting together a group meeting. I don't know from a sunshine standpoint who can attend from the commissions, but I'll leave that to the city attorney to advise you on. But again, as these issues arise, let's not wait. I would suggest let's not wait for a group meeting, but let's just roll those out to Tiffany, and she'll get them to the project manager. We can start addressing those sooner rather than later.
If I could, Mayor, I think we have, and I think that that's why we're asking for an additional
Okay,
meeting.
well, we'll continue to work on it, okay? I mean, it is not a perfect science. This is a new technology, a new product, and we're trying to do the best we can. Anything else, commissioners? Anything for the good of the body? Hearing none, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you all
Happy
very much.
holidays, everyone.